Not many people are familiar with the name Georges van Houten. Perhaps even among art lovers, there are not many who immediately recall his paintings, or even one exhibition. And it's strange, because his works are filled with the energy of the times, emotions, and the desire for perfection. He did not pursue fame, did not seek loud titles. But his work, despite its quiet history, mattered. It spoke about life, about people after the war, about how art can capture the subtlest movements of the soul, and yet, Van Houten's name can be heard in an unexpected place at Oxford University. Imagine, during the traditional beating priory, where the benefactors of the institution are remembered. The artist's name is heard. His paintings, his artistic legacy became part of the Ashmolean Museum. It is thanks to this that his name has remained not only in artistic circles, but also in the context of cultural history, even if for many this name remains a mystery. Who was Georges van Houten? And why is his life worthy of our attention? Let's find out. Georges van Houten was born in 1888 in Antwerp. The city, full of history, art, and commerce, could have been the subject of any story. But this time, we are talking about a boy growing up in a Dutch family. His childhood was probably spent talking about culture, travel, and family ties to the Netherlands, the country that gave the world Rembrandt, Vermeer, and now perhaps was preparing to raise another master. Georges was gifted. It was impossible not to notice. He was drawn to art, to colors, to reflecting on canvas what his eyes saw and his heart felt. His parents supported this aspiration, and when the opportunity arose, the young man began studying with the famous Belgian post-impressionist Jacob Smith. Smith was not just a teacher, but a mentor. He helped Georges see how simple things can become masterpieces if you look at them in a special way. This idea struck a chord with the young man. His works became more and more expressive, and they began to show a strong influence of Vincent van Gogh. The lines, the energy of his brushstrokes, the expression of colors, all of this reminded him of the work of the great Dutch master. But Georges looked wider. He was also impressed by Jean-François Millet with his depictions of peasant life, so simple and profound at the same time. He learned to combine these approaches. On the one hand, the emotionality of Van Gogh, on the other, the gentleness and humanity of Millet. Georges van Houten was young and eager to learn. His path in art was just beginning, but even then it was clear that his works would be not only about technique. They would be about life. About its beauty and complexity. I want to thank everyone who watches this video, supports the channel with likes and subscriptions. According to statistics, 80% of regular viewers watch the channel without subscribing, which negatively affects the recommendations of videos on YouTube. Therefore, I ask everyone who is watching the channel for the first time or is already a regular viewer to subscribe and thus support us. And finally, I remind you of our Telegram channel where we post videos with paintings by artists that we cannot publish on YouTube because they are too explicit. The link to our Telegram channel is in the description of this video and the QR code that appears on the screen. Paris at the beginning of the 20th century was a place where art was raging like a hurricane. There was something unusual in every corner of the city: exhibitions, coffee shops, meetings of artists, new ideas floating in the air. Young Georges van Houten arrived here in 1905. He was full of hopes and aspirations. Paris was to become his city, his stage. In the French capital, he immediately felt among his own. Here, everyone wanted to express themselves through colors, lines, and shapes. Georges immersed himself in this atmosphere, learning and improving. He spent hours wandering the streets of Paris, observing life. And then he transferred what he saw to the canvas. In 1910, he became a member of the Société d'Artistes Indépendants. It was a great achievement for the young artist. This union brought together the most daring and brilliant masters of his time. Georges exhibited his works there and gradually gained recognition. His style was recognized for its emotionality and liveliness, and then came his first solo exhibition. Imagine 1913, the Eugene Blot Gallery in Paris. It was a great moment for Georges. He had been preparing for a long time and was nervous, but his works received favorable reviews. The following year, he had his second exhibition at the same gallery. It was even more successful. It was then that he was noticed by Theodore Duret. He was a legendary man, a great connoisseur of the Impressionists, a critic whose opinion meant a lot. Duret was fascinated by Van Houten's works. He saw something unique in him, something that distinguished him from others, and then Duret made an offer. He commissioned a portrait of himself from Georges, a young artist and such an influential critic. For Georges, this was not only a challenge but also a chance. He worked on the portrait for a long time and diligently. It was not an easy job. It was his opportunity to leave his mark. The painting was completed the following year. Unfortunately, it was not immediately exhibited because of the First World War. But this portrait became a symbol of the fact that Georges van Houten was gradually turning from an apprentice to a real master. And Paris, this city of dreams, helped him in this. In 1914, the world changed. The First World War broke out, and millions of people were forced to leave their normal lives. Georges van Houten was no exception. He returned to Belgium to serve in the army. How did this affect him? One can only imagine how the frontline realities shaped his views, leaving an imprint on his soul and, of course, on his work. But even in the darkest times, art remained a source of strength for Georges. After the war, he returned to Paris and, as if with renewed energy, continued to create. One of his most important works, a portrait of Theodore Duret, which he had completed before the war, finally got a chance to see the light of day. In 1919, this portrait was presented at the Salon d'Automne, and the reaction was overwhelming. The audience and critics recognized his mastery. It was a moment of triumph. In the same year, Georges published a portfolio of lithographs called Harlequinades. These were works inspired by circus scenes, harlequins, clowns, acrobats. He created their images with such a love of detail that each work conveyed not only movement but also mood. There was something funny and sad in them at the same time. Have you ever noticed how often circus performers seem cheerful on the outside but carry a shadow of melancholy inside? Georges felt it and put it on paper. Perhaps it was his experiences at the front that made his work so emotionally deep. The year 1920 was a turning point in Georges van Houten's life. At that time, he applied for membership in the prestigious Société du Salon d'Automne, an organization that was an important platform for artists seeking to establish themselves in the art world. However, his application was rejected. Although, as it turned out later, all foreign applicants were rejected that year, Georges took it very personally. He was convinced that it was intrigue. In his mind, he blamed his contemporaries Matisse, Braque, and others with whom he may have competed. Whatever the case, this incident left a deep wound in his heart. The rejection undermined his faith in the art world, which seemed unfair and hostile to him. Despite this, Georges continued to exhibit his work for some time. He chose to do so at the more democratic Salon d'Independence, where there was no jury that could reject artists. But over the years, this interest began to wane. In 1932, he took part in his last exhibition. In 1933, Georges van Houten's life changed dramatically. He inherited an impressive fortune, which gave him the financial freedom that most artists could only dream of. On the one hand, it was a gift of fate. It gave him financial independence, but at the same time it deprived him of the motivation to be active in his artistic work. Georges could afford to focus entirely on art without thinking about selling paintings or pleasing critics. But on the other hand, this wealth isolated him. He continued to paint, but no longer exhibited or sold them. His art became his personal world, to which no one else had access. He became more and more distant from the artistic community, immersing himself in his own world. This period became special because the artist created a series of unique lithographs capturing the atmosphere of Montmartre, one of the most colorful districts of Paris, known for its bohemian atmosphere and the many artists who worked there. He also dedicated a number of works to the famous Moulin Rouge cabaret, which has become a symbol of Parisian nightlife. These lithographs are characterized by bright, dynamic lines and expressive images that convey the lively energy of street life, the atmosphere of theatrical performances and dancing that prevailed in these places. Van Houten was deeply influenced by Toulouse-Lautrec, and this influence becomes particularly evident in his lithographs from this period. Like Lautrec, Van Houten used simple but expressive lines to depict scenes from nightlife, maintaining drama and emotional intensity in his work. He adopted from Lautrec the concept of combining graphics and painting, bringing images to the foreground and emphasizing the dynamic movements that characterize scenes in theaters or cabarets. These works preserve the spirit of the era and incredibly accurately recreate the atmosphere of 1930s France. Toulouse-Lautrec's influence on Georges van Houten is evident not only in his style, but also in his desire to convey the sensual, almost theatrical quality of his paintings. Like Lautrec, Van Houten also paid attention to the characters from nightlife, theater performers, dancers, musicians, and ordinary patrons of the establishments that made Paris so special. The images in his lithographs not only depict the life of Montmartre, but also convey an emotional atmosphere, allowing the viewer to feel what was happening in these places. Georges van Houten's legacy is an important aspect of his contribution to 20th century art. After his death, the artist left a significant part of his work for future generations, which allowed his works to be preserved and appreciated in the context of the development of contemporary art. One of the artist's largest donations was the transfer of 300 paintings and his art collection to the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. This gesture was not only an act of charity, but also a testament to his desire to share his art with the general public. Van Houten's collection has become an important part of the museum, where viewers can experience the diversity of his creative pursuits, from portraits to scenes from everyday life. Merged with emotional accents, in 1965, for years after his death, the Ashmolean Museum hosted a posthumous retrospective that allowed viewers to better understand the full range of his work. The exhibition emphasized not only Van Houten's artistic skill, but also his ability to combine different stylistic trends and visual effects, creating a peculiar, unique language in painting and graphics. Georges van Houten strived for the perfection of the line in his works. His paintings and lithographs are characterized by a sophisticated use of lines that give the images precision, grace, and dynamism. This is especially important in his graphic works, where the line is the main tool of expression. The search for ideal proportions and emotional depth through the line became one of the key features of his creative method. In the post-war period, the artist depicted important social transformations in his paintings. He made an important contribution to the reflection of post-war society, in particular through the depiction of scenes from everyday life, cultural changes, and human emotions that arose during this period. His work not only documents this time of transition, but also penetrates the depths of social and cultural changes that have become important to new generations. Van Houten also left a significant impact on his contemporaries and subsequent generations of artists. His pursuit of mastery of line and composition has inspired many artists, especially in the fields of graphics and painting. Georges van Houten's legacy continues to influence the art world, and his work is still studied and appreciated as an important milestone in the development of European art.